How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, joining you guys today on November 6th, a Wednesday here. We had yesterday off because of the election day, so we're going to continue on from what we were talking about, or what we were supposed to be talking about on Monday and into Tuesday, with some more recaps on today's show. The slate on Sunday was pretty eventful, so I couldn't go too many days without really talking about it because there were some pretty big, impactful games over the weekend, as we all know. We're going to talk about the Monday Night Football game that we didn't get a chance to talk about. Also, the trade deadline being yesterday. We're going to recap some of those moves and some more games as well. The Vikings game, the Rams game, and the Eagles game, all coming up on today's episode. Make sure to stick around for all of that. And also, as we typically do, like always, if you guys want to get involved in the show, want to have a question, opinion, or just any statement you want to share and be part of the show, please don't hesitate to do so. Your input and insight is always a big part of what makes this show great, so we thrive on your energies and your guys' thoughts on anything we have to say on the live show, so you guys can get involved and join the conversation. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your message stands out and you get featured on the show, there's an easy way to do that just by using the new Super Chat feature. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your Super Chat, and this way it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and also it's a fantastic way to support our channel and for us to keep bringing you the sports content you guys all love. We are always very appreciative of your guys' support and your involvement in the show. It always is very greatly received over here in GSMC. So go ahead and let us know what you're thinking. Hit the Super Chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. Again, if you want to get involved with the show, use the new Super Chat feature just by clicking the $ again at the bottom of the chat box and get involved with the show today. But now we can jump in and get back to talking about football after a day hiatus yesterday. I'm not joining you guys. We're going to get right into it and talk about the Monday Night Football game before we get all into the craziness of the trade deadline yesterday. We got to get to this Monday Night Football game because we had a great game on Monday, as you guys all know, for most of you that saw it, as the Chiefs remained perfect and go to 8-0 after an overtime victory over the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. 30-24 was the final score. The Buccaneers made it a very close game despite playing without their two most impactful players on offense, Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. This game was forced into overtime, if you guys didn't know, after the Bucs were able to get a game-tying touchdown to tie the score at 24 when Baker Mayfield threw that touchdown to Ryan Miller with 27 seconds left. Ryan Miller also finished with a pretty awesome stat line. 1 reception, 1 yard, 1 touchdown on 3 targets, which was awesome to see for Ryan Miller. Made an impact in the game regardless of how many targets he got. That was great to see. But, you know, it ultimately came up short because the Chiefs just continued to excel in those big moments, right? When the big moment comes, Patrick, Andy Reid, Travis, the level of execution that the Chiefs have in these moments, I don't think should be taken for granted or should be belittled in any way because they do it so often, right? Everybody just looks at overtime. You guys saw it by Baker Mayfield's, response to the coin toss, right? You saw it. You saw it in the coin toss, right? How they flipped the coin, whatever the call was for Patrick. It obviously was in their favor, and Baker just gave like really, like, are you serious? Like one of those reactions, like. It shouldn't be taken for granted, and even the other team knows it. So we got to make sure to not just, breeze over it, because executing at this level isn't as easy as they make it look. So, Zaire Horley, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. There was no show yesterday just because of the elections going on, so I don't know how many shows took off, but a couple of the shows weren't live on air for the election, so that's the reason why there was no show yesterday. So, continuing on with the Chiefs in this game, right? Looking at how the Chiefs won this game, they became the first team since the Carolina Panthers back in 2014, actually, to win 14 straight games. Obviously, the Chiefs dating back to last season where they went on that run there towards the end of the year. Continuing on into this year as well, they've won 14 straight games. Again, another remarkable record for this team. And also, they became the 6th Super Bowl team to start 8-0 following the previous season where they won everything. And a pretty neat fact also, they've won their last 8 games while trailing in the second half as well, including the playoffs. So it's been, just as you'd expect, but also, again, don't let this just be seemingly normal, right? This is not normal what the Chiefs are doing, and you can make an argument that they're not even playing very well either, right? Because Patrick seems a little bit just un-Patrick-like for the level that he's playing at right now. For them to be undefeated, you can only imagine where they're going to be in a couple weeks when Patrick is actually firing on all cylinders. So it's pretty scary at this point in time, but still they got the win on Monday Night Football. And just looking around everywhere else where we saw some contributions, Patrick, like I said, 291 yards, 3 touchdowns in this game. He was sacked 4 times, but still pulled out a victory. Kareem Hunt started the game off pretty slow, but he finished another game with over 100 yards on 27 carries and that game-winning touchdown in overtime. Then the receivers for the Chiefs, Travis Kelce, 14 receptions for 100 yards, and DeAndre Hopkins having his best game for the Chiefs, 8 receptions, 86 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So those 2 guys leading the efforts for the Chiefs on the receiving end, while for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, like I said, a very good game, I guess, just for where they are right now. Not a lot of people put in a lot of stock into this game just because of their injuries, but some of their notable performers, Baker Mayfield, 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. They had 95 total rushing yards with getting contributions from a lot of guys like Sean Tucker, Rashad White, Sterling Shepard, and Bucky Irving. All of them contributed to the rushing game. And their leading receiver was Cade Otton, their tight end, who's building a good relationship with Baker Mayfield. I think he's definitely the go-to guy. Even with Godwin and Evans, Cade Otton was still getting a good amount of looks. So he finished with 8 receptions, 77 yards, and a touchdown in this game. So, it doesn't look like they had crazy performances like you see from Hopkins and Kelce, right? But still, they made it a very close game, and that was good to see. And then looking at the game and how it kind of all played out in some of the crucial moments, the Chiefs were initially leading this game 3-0 before there was back-to-back touchdowns by the Buccaneers and then one by the Chiefs. So still the Chiefs held a 3-point lead at 10-7 now, before there was a little bit of a scare with Travis Kelce when he fumbled the ball with about a minute left before halftime, but the Buccaneers weren't able to take advantage of that, and both teams went into halftime still at 10-7. Then in the second half, it got a little bit more exciting, right? Because we saw the Bucs score a touchdown and also tack on a field goal, so they were leading 17-10. But the Chiefs, not too far behind, they tied up once again, and then we find ourselves at 17-17 for a majority of the second half until, if I'm being honest, until we saw that second touchdown by DeAndre Hopkins. Once we saw that, with about 4 minutes left in the entire game, I thought that was going to be pretty much it. I thought, the Chiefs scored, then they were going to go out there on defense and just shut the door completely on this Bucs team. But credit to the Bucs for putting together a very impressive drive, 10 plays, 71 total yards to drive down the field and score a touchdown, like I said, with about 24 seconds left after that. But no 2-point conversion, which was obviously a big discussion afterwards. And, they tied it up. And then in overtime, of course, the Chiefs end up winning it. They won the coin toss, and Mahomes never gave the ball back, and they won the game 30-24. Also in this game, Mahomes suffered a little bit of a scare with that ankle injury, but he really didn't miss any time, so it looks to be all good. But we have to talk about the 2-point conversion, or the lack of 2-point conversion, right? Because everyone killed the Buccaneers for not going for it, right? You have an opportunity to beat the Chiefs in prime time on the road. Both of your star receivers missing, so why don't you go for 2? Well, I don't hate the decision, honestly, like a lot of other people do. obviously it looks bad in hindsight, right, where you play conservative and you never see the ball again, right, when the Chiefs just go down and drive it and score the game-winning touchdown. But I think it's just more, it feels like people are making the argument like it's just more of an attitude sort of moral thing at this point, right? I feel like if they would have gone for 2 and not gotten it, a lot of people would have just been happy that they just went for it and not really cared about winning the game. They would have just gave them a pat in the back and said, well, you went for it. You went at least to try and win. Good for you. You lost the game, but good try at least going for 2 points. Where I think in this situation, not going for 2, it doesn't necessarily, write off the entire game, right? I feel like that's what a lot of people are making it out to be like, where, it's no guarantee that the Chiefs get the ball, right? That's one thing. The way the coin toss works and everything, obviously, you got to have a little bit of luck there, right? And, of course, it falls in the favor of the Chiefs. And I do know that you don't even want to give them that opportunity to get the ball, right? But getting a 2-point conversion isn't the easiest thing to do, especially when you're down Chris Godwin, when you're down Mike Evans. You're going to rely on Sterling Shepard, on Ryan Miller, these other guys that aren't really accustomed to these situations, and you're going to rely on them to go out there and win you the game. The Chiefs are going to be double, triple covering Cade Otton, so he's probably not going to get involved. Are you going to throw it out to the running back? Unlikely. So a 2-point conversion in that situation isn't always a given, but again, I feel like people would have been happy just for the fact that they went out and tried it, where I like this decision to take it into overtime because, again, if the Chiefs get the ball, the Bucs can stop them, right? That's obviously a possibility, but, they didn't. The Chiefs executed. They've been in this situation millions of times. Knowing that, I do get the point that knowing that, you don't want to give them that chance, but the way that this game was going, how tight it was, I don't hate the decision to not go for 2. If you lose the game then and there, I still believe people would have criticized them a little bit for going for 2 in that situation, right? It was a lose-lose situation. I don't hate the decision by Todd Bowles. And if anything, it looks like they're going to be all right, at least in this meantime, while they wait for Mike Evans to come back. So, it is what it is now. They lost the game. They played a good game, but overall, it did end up in a loss here. If the Chiefs get the ball in overtime, they're winning. It was a Vegas game. Yeah, I mean, as a fan and as everybody knows watching football, I mean, you said it yourself, if the Chiefs get the ball. You don't know they're getting the ball. That's really my biggest pushback, I guess I would say. The Bucs could have easily gotten the ball if the coin toss just fell their way. And again, yes, the Chiefs are heavily favored to win in overtime if they get the ball. But the way the game was going, there was some moments where I felt the Bucs made Patrick a little bit uncomfortable. But, in those moments, no one's ever going to bet against Patrick and the Chiefs. So I do understand the point, but I don't think it's just an outright, blasphemous decision to not go for 2 there. I didn't hate it, and overall, it is what it is. The Chiefs go to 8-0. It looks like they're firing on all cylinders, or at least starting to get there with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins. So that's pretty exciting if you're a Chiefs fan. But for the meantime, we're going to move on from this game. There's a lot more to talk about, starting with yesterday's trade deadline that we have to get to. I pinpointed about 5 of the moves that we saw yesterday that I really like. We're going to talk about them and just my overall thoughts on them and which one I think is the best move that we saw yesterday at the 4 p.m. deadline. We're going to talk about that when we return in just a few moments.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh,
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
We are back now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue with more coverage around the NFL, and we have to talk about the trade deadline that came and went yesterday. The 4 p.m. Eastern Time deadline was filled with a lot of surprises, a lot of moves yesterday leading up to that deadline, and I gathered here about 5 of the trades that really made the most noise, in my opinion, and just overall, 4 out of the 5 that I really like. So, starting off with the first one here, I actually have it up here for you guys. We're going to talk about Tre'Davious White. Tre'Davious White being traded from the Los Angeles Rams over to the Baltimore Ravens. The Rams get a 2026 7th round pick back from the Ravens, while the Ravens get obviously Tre'Davious White and also a 2027 7th round pick. And for the general basis of this trade, obviously it addresses the secondary for the Baltimore Ravens. That was their biggest weakness. That was something I was questionable of when they traded for a guy like Diontae Johnson. I thought, this doesn't really address what they're missing, right? Their secondary was still not looking very great out there against the Broncos. Obviously, they ended up destroying them. But for the meantime, for games where you're going to face more potent offenses, I thought they have to address it some way, somehow, get somebody in there to help it out. And they brought in Tre'Davious White, who hasn't played since week 4. He's been a healthy scratch for the most part for the Rams since that time. And, I think Sean McVay actually described it as just not an ideal situation for Tre'Davious White there in Los Angeles. And he just kind of, I'm assuming, fell out of favor there in Los Angeles, right? So he gets an opportunity here to go right away to a contending team. Not like the Rams weren't, but the Ravens have been steamrolling a lot more teams than the Rams have. So he gets an opportunity here to go to a very good contending team, and hopefully for the Ravens, right, they can get the best out of Tre'Davious White, who has been struggling with injury, who hasn't played in a good amount of weeks now so far. So I don't know how much involvement he'll get right away, but this is a veteran player, an all-pro, Pro Bowl type of player as well in the past with the Buffalo Bills. So how they maneuver, Marlon Humphrey's going to be the number one, but opposite of him, they've had Stevens across from him or their rookie Nate Wiggins. I'll be interested to see where Tre'Davious White fits in that rotation, or around the formation as well. But overall, it was a trade that I liked. It addressed what the Ravens were looking for, and now everyone's kind of got their final team going into the home stretch of this thing. So we'll see how much Tre'Davious White gets involved, along with Diontae Johnson, who was traded a couple days before this. But the next move I wanted to talk about was staying in the AFC North, talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers, where they finally got that wide receiver they've been searching for this entire time. It's been Brandon Ayuk, it's been Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Deebo Samuel there for a brief second. And, it ended up being Mike Williams of all these guys. And what's funny about this move is that in the offseason, because Mike Williams was a free agent this offseason, he actually had the Steelers on his scheduled, visits during the offseason, but he had the Jets right before them. And obviously he liked it enough to stay there in New York and not have any more visits. So that's where the connection originally came from. And because Mike Williams obviously didn't really work out there in New York, right, when they brought in Devontae, already having Garrett Wilson, and then that mix-up situation there with Aaron Rodgers about the ending of the game against the against the Bills, I want to say, where maybe Mike Williams ran the wrong route or whatnot, according to Aaron Rodgers. It felt like it wasn't going to work out since then. And with this connection to the Steelers obviously looking for a wide receiver. There was reports that they had talks with the Seahawks about DK Metcalf. They were interested in Darius Slayton. Courtland Sutton was a name that we talked about on here, but it ultimately ends up being Mike Williams. And the Steelers only trade away a 5th-round pick for him, and they already had another 5th-round pick on top of that. So really not big too big of a cost there, and it addresses a spot that they desperately needed, right? Across from George Pickens, bringing in a veteran guy like Mike Williams, and the biggest thing about him is hopefully he can just stay healthy and really contribute. Number two, as the sooner he gets involved and more accustomed to this playbook, he is going to play and he is going to be out there. So it's great to see. Again, hopefully he stays healthy, and if he does, with what he brings along with Russell Wilson, a similar mold to George Pickens, and how both of them are ideal targets down the field for Russell Wilson. I love this move for the Steelers to at least address that wide receiver position. I wasn't expecting Preston Smith, though. Preston Smith came over from the Packers after the Steelers traded a 7th-round pick to the Packers for Preston Smith. And today, I saw a report that Preston actually requested a trade from the Packers a couple weeks ago. So, I felt that he was a big contributor to their defense, or that he at least wasn't expendable in my estimation. But clearly he wasn't happy there. Because he did ask for a trade. So one of the biggest points that he made today was that he was very excited to come back and play in a 3-4 scheme and, contribute to a scheme that actually fits him, that he actually has a lot of comfortability playing in. So I like this move just because now looking at a big picture, I wasn't expecting it, but now that it is done, it is official, he is added to Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, obviously, and Nate Herbig. Now you have 4 guys, veteran guys like Preston and TJ, Alex, who's a little bit younger, and still Nick Herbig, that is very young and looking very good. Now you have 4 guys that you can rotate one package, Alex and TJ, and then once they get tired or they just need a sub real quick, you bring in Preston and Nick Herbig. So I think the Steelers did everything that they could to make this team better, and it follows the theme that we're going to get to towards the end of this segment. But I love both of these moves that the Steelers made. Also, I will admittedly say, being a Steelers fan, I don't love it as much as this move, right? I think this move definitely took the cake for me, or is in contention, right? Because Marshawn Lattimore going over to the Washington Commanders made so much sense. And it's just a perfect fit for what the Commanders are needing, right? Because in the official parts of this trade, the Commanders get Marshawn Lattimore and a 2025 5th-round pick, while the Saints were able to give up Lattimore, and they're also going to get a 2025 3rd-round pick and a 4th-round pick also in 2025. So, yeah, the Saints get picks back for where they were right now in the season. Their season was pretty much done with, wrapped up after they fired Dennis Allen, losing 7 straight games, and the most recent one being to the Carolina Panthers, right? This team really just deflated as the season went on. So trading a guy and getting some assets back for Marshawn Lattimore, I think it's good value for the Saints, right? Trying to start this rebuild process that they have going. And for the Commanders, right? You get a guy, a 4-time Pro Bowler who is still only 28 years old and can be pretty much, when he's healthy, be left on an island against another team's number 1 wide receiver, which allows this defense to do a lot more with any kind of blitzes that they want to run, coverages, and all sorts that you can imagine. Marshawn Lattimore makes everything about this defense so much better, and I also just love it because you're getting a guy in his prime because you're trying to win right now. So pretty much saying to everyone that they really believe in this team that they have right now, despite having a rookie quarterback, a coach in his first year with this team, a new offensive coordinator, a new GM, new everything. Despite all of that, where other teams probably would have been in a disastrous situation at this point in time, the Commanders have hit it right on the nail, or right on the head of the nail, and just excelled and exceeded a bunch of expectations this season. So it looks like they're really going for it. They believe they can win the division. They believe they can make some noise in the playoffs, and just all stemming really from Jaden Daniels and just executing that draft pick to perfection. It's awesome to see. I love seeing teams like the Commanders, teams like the Texans, like the Lions a couple years in the making, make this next step and really, putting their foot down and saying that we are really contenders now and going forward. So that's why I like this move so much. I think Marshawn, wherever he was traded, other than the Chiefs, admittedly, that would have stunk if he went to the Chiefs. But this, I think, it just makes it a lot more of an even playing field with a lot of the teams in the NFC, just making for more entertaining games. Then after that, this was also in contention for one of my favorite trades, just because, again, much like the Marshawn Lattimore deal, this trade to get Zadarius Smith over to the Lions was one of the most obvious ones that just kept getting talked about for the last few days, and finally became official. The Lions get Zadarius Smith and a 2026 7th-round pick, while the Browns get a 5th-round pick in 2025 and a 6th-round pick in 2026. And obviously, it just addresses the injury that the Lions sustained with the injury to Aiden Hutchinson, him being done for the year. You need a pass rusher. For as good as this Lions team is, just bullying, beating everybody up, and beating everybody by at least like 10 points, you need a pass rusher, at least a decent one, a very good number 2 on your team to draw some attention in that area. Because if you have nobody, when you get to the playoffs, it really starts to make a difference between the teams that are in contention to go to the Super Bowl and some that just get left along the way. And the Lions have pretty much everything else. So getting a guy like Zadarius, a veteran guy that doesn't really cost them too much, made the most sense and finally became official over, I think this one was the first trade announced actually on Tuesday. So we got that one out of the way. But there's always going to be one that was a little bit questionable, right? Unfortunately, the Cowboys just continue to confuse everybody with their decisions. The Cowboys traded for Jonathan Mingo. You know, there was the talks that they needed more on offense. They needed a guy opposite of CeeDee Lamb. We're not going to sit here and bash Jonathan Mingo, but it is just a little confusing, and it looks worse, to be honest, when this trade is made and you give up a 4th-round pick to the Panthers, and Dallas gets Jonathan Mingo in a 7th-round pick. It looks worse, obviously, because everybody just right away compares it to DeAndre Hopkins going for a 5th, Mike Williams going for a 5th. I think Amari Cooper went for not that much either. And Devontae Adams, the same thing. When you compare it to those guys, obviously it looks worse because, you know, Jonathan Mingo, not too many people know about him and where the Cowboys are right now. Honestly, a trade wasn't going to work anyway if they traded for, I don't know, like a guy, I don't even know. If they ended up trading for a guy like DeAndre or Amari, it wasn't going to make it any better, especially now knowing that Dak was going to probably go on IR, as Jerry Jones said. So, I mean, a trade wasn't really going to move the needle anyway. This one was just a little bit confusing. Obviously, building for the future and adding a guy like Jonathan Mingo, a young guy that's still on his rookie contract. But, I mean, it's just confusing. It's not a great move, but it doesn't really move the needle too much. If they made the move or not, it wasn't going to change my opinion anyway. So, they were in a bad situation overall. So this trade was just kind of null and void. But overall, just my thoughts on these 5 trades. Like I said, I think Zadarius was my favorite trade that ended up happening, just because Marshawn is dealing with a hamstring injury, and I don't want that to linger or anything like that, and hopefully it doesn't. But I think Zadarius, he's been producing at a high rate for a very good number 2 pass rusher. So him joining this juggernaut of a Lions team does end up being my favorite trade, but Marshawn could easily exceed that. If he's healthy, he plays right away, and he's everything that we all know he can be. So overall, all these trades were awesome, and the theme that I was talking about just from trade deadline day is that all these teams that watch the Bills get better, that watch the Chiefs get better, and you know, those are already contending teams, so for them to go out and be proactive and get better, I liked how these other good teams that have good records and that are in good spots also weren't just sitting around on their hands and thinking like, oh well, like why are we even going to try? The Chiefs got DeAndre and the Bills got Amari, what's the point? No, they went out, they got players, they also tried to get better. And, you know, with everybody now having their final rosters and really, like I said, trying to get better, it's going to make the second half of the year that much more entertaining. This season has felt a lot closer, a lot more competitive in a lot of these games. So now with these moves happening yesterday on the deadline, I think it's only going to get better from here, and I think that's it's kind of hard to beat what we've already seen, but I have high hopes for this second half of the year, and it's going to start in just a day from today. It's going to start tomorrow in Week 10 with a great matchup where we could see Tre'Davious White and the Ravens take on the Cincinnati Bengals, but we'll leave that off for tomorrow. But for right now, we're going to get to more of the recaps. Starting off with the Eagles game, they won 28-23, but it was a lot closer than it should have been. Why? Stick around and find out when we return. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Back here now on the Chip Shot Football Podcast to round off some of the last recaps here from Week 9 before we move into Week 10 starting tomorrow. Like we mentioned in the last segment, one of the games I wanted to talk about was this Eagles game. And the Eagles, like you guys can see on the screen, hold off the Jaguars to win 28-23 after almost giving up a 22-point lead at one point in this game. The Eagles win their fourth game in a row since their bye week to go to 6-2, while the Jaguars lose this game 28-23, and they are now in sole last place in the AFC South because the Tennessee Titans just beat the New England Patriots, so they have that game above the Jaguars, and it's just overall been a disappointing season for the Jaguars. Now really they're as close as possible to hitting rock bottom, if not already, but with being last place in the AFC South and having the season that they had last year being so disappointing, to follow it up by a season like this, it's not over, but it's definitely not at a point halfway through the year where you thought this Jaguars team could be, again, especially coming off of last year's just debacle. So that's one point of it, right? But in other news in this game, just some notable notes. The Eagles wide receiver A.J. Brown left this game pretty early with an injury. It looked to be a knee injury, but now that we have more information on it, it doesn't look to be anything too serious, which is great because A.J. has already been dealing with a hamstring injury that kept him out for a couple of weeks. So this one would have really been disappointing, to say the least, for the Eagles, but it doesn't look like he'll be out for any time, or maybe just very little. So that was great to see or hear back from after the game. Also, the biggest discussion point, the biggest story coming from this game, apart from the Eagles continuing to win, everyone is looking at this Eagles team a lot closer because of the way these games sort of play out for the Eagles and Nick Sirianni, right? Because the Eagles drew the ire of everybody with their aggressive, some may call it reckless approach to this game, going for a bunch of fourth downs, 2-point conversions, and saying that it almost cost them the game, in totality, in all honesty, I really didn't feel like the Jaguars were ever going to win this game, but they made it close there towards the end. But the Eagles certainly gave them their chances to complete this comeback, because in this game, some of the questionable decisions were going on it on fourth downs where some people might have deemed it unnecessary, or 2-point conversions that, again, people thought that the Eagles were just doing too much with them, because in this game, after everything was said and done, the Eagles were 0 for 2 on fourth downs and 0 for 3 on 2-point conversions as well, which, like I said, almost cost them the game, considering that if you hit a couple of those fourth down situations, you turn them into field goals, or the 2-point conversions, you just add 1 point for all 3 of those opportunities. This game probably isn't that close, and nobody's really talking about this, but the Eagles, like I said, certainly made it more of a contest than they needed it to, certainly in this game. And also, Doug Peterson was also coming back to face his former team. He is now 0-2 against the Eagles since he left. And again, when we predicted this game, I didn't think there was much of a chance, but he was almost close to getting one up over his former team. But for as close as the score was, the way the Jaguars played, it shouldn't have been that close, like I said. And just overall, from what we saw from the Jaguars, there was really no running game for the Jaguars. Trevor Lawrence had some good moments, but again, some equally bad moments as well. And the defense is one of the worst against the pass. So all of those things still was only a 5-point game, which is pretty crazy to me. And looking at how it all played out and some of the performances from this game, Jalen Hurts, another clean game for the most part, no turnovers. He was sacked 3 times, but he threw 2 touchdowns and threw for 230 yards. Saquon, monster game, 27 carries, 159 rushing yards, and a touchdown. And receiving-wise, Devontae Smith really stepped up for A.J. Brown. He finished with 4 receptions, 87 yards, and that one-handed touchdown, which was huge in determining the outcome of this game. Whereas with Trevor, no passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 169 yards. The rushing game, absolutely disgusting. 60 total rushing yards among everybody. Travis Etienne had 3 carries, for 24 yards. He was the leading rusher. And Tank Bigsby had more carries with 8, but he only had 22 yards. Nowhere near the level you need to have to let alone beat the Eagles, but be anywhere near where a good team should be in terms of running the ball. And passing, Evan Ingram had a great game, or had an okay game, 5 receptions for 45 yards. But even still, these stats don't suggest that the Eagles should have only won this game by 5 points. But how it got to this point, well, looking at how the game unraveled itself, the Eagles were actually up 10-0 after a quick score by Saquon and tacking on 3 points. You're thinking that you got this prediction right? That this game was going to get away from the Jaguars very, very quickly, but it stayed at 10-0 for a while. It stayed like that despite the missed 4th down attempts by both teams. It's still 10-0 game for the majority of the first half, but for me, despite it only being 10-0, I thought the Jags really, the Jags lost any chance at this game with that interception with a minute 42 left in the first half. That's the point where I thought it's 10-0 and the Jaguars throw this interception on just the first play of that drive. Trevor throws that interception, and at that point I'm thinking, this game's got to be over. The Jaguars just can't help themselves, or they can't stop hurting themselves. And of course, like you'd expect, from going into a situation into halftime where it's 10-0 and this game is still within reach, you throw that interception and Saquon scores right after that, and then from that point on, the Eagles go up 16-0. A failed 2-point conversion. That's why they're up 16-0 at this point going into halftime. Then the Eagles score another touchdown, another 6 points early in the second half to go up 22-0 after missing another 2-point conversion. But at that point, you're really thinking that this game's over, right? But the Jaguars' first touchdown of the game came, right after that. So it's 22-7, or actually, 22-8, because they did convert on their 2-point conversion. Then the following drive, Saquon fumbles, and the Jags return it for a touchdown. So out of nowhere, just completely out of thin air, the Jaguars are back into this game after converting on 2-point conversions, 2 touchdowns. Now the game is 22-16, and you have no idea how this is the case. But the Eagles were able to kind of get themselves under control, score another touchdown. The Jaguars answer, so it's 23-28. Again, after the Eagles miss another 2-point conversion, 28-23 is the score at this time. And Jake Elliott missed a field goal, which really would have put it in a very tough spot for the Jaguars, because if he hits that field goal, it's 31-23, and now the Jaguars need a 2-point conversion, right? But he misses. He just misses it, and it comes down to the final possession. But the Jaguars just let themselves down in a game where realistically they didn't deserve, honestly, to win in the end. They could have stolen this game, but it was a bad turnover, a bad interception to Nakobe Dean, which sealed this game up, and the Eagles escape with this victory. But it's not to say, or it's not without criticism, where the Eagles had 4 drives in this game that ended with touchdowns, but they decided to go for 2 points on 3 of these 4 touchdown drives, and they failed on all of them. So you look at those situations, those 3 drives that they went for 2, that's, if they decide to kick the extra point, that's 3 additional points, right? If everything else plays out the same. So you're talking about 31-23, right? But also they went for it twice while they were in the red zone, in the red zone, driving for a touchdown, right? And they failed on both of them. So if you add those 3 extra points that they could have had, plus these 2 field goals that they also could have had, because they were in the red zone, so more likely than not, Jake Elliott was going to make them. That's 9 additional points, and this game really isn't even close, right? You add 9 points to 28, and the final score is going to be 37-23. So a lot more convincing and a lot more telling, if not for these questionable, just not extremely unnecessary, but just it feels like they're doing too much. And I know they convert a lot of 4th downs, right, with the tush push and whatnot, and the combination of Jalen Hurts and Saquon in the backfield is extremely tough to stop. But once you don't get one, they missed the first 4th down conversion in the red zone, right, early in the game, right? At that point, the Eagles are feeling good, like they're in control. So I understand that. But the second time where you miss it and you have the opportunity to kick a field goal in the red zone and you decide not to, that's where we're kind of tugging the line a little bit. Like, all right, like, was that really necessary? If you don't get it, fine. You're still winning in this game, right, despite that. But the 2-point conversions, it kind of just feels like you're trying to make up for those missed opportunities that you had on 4th down, and you can't base the decisions down later in the game and crunch time of the game with trying to recoup or recover from the past bad decisions that you made earlier in the game. It doesn't really work like that. And it feels like at this point that Sirianni is the one that decides more often than not to go for these 4th downs, for these 2-point conversions, right? And that's just who he is, right? He's aggressive. He's, he might be uber, just emotional on the sidelines, right? That's just who he is. But when it starts to kind of affect the play calling, or the decision making, and you're too emotional, you're too in the moment to really come to a reasonable decision, that's where we have to really reevaluate these things and think twice about what we're really going to do, right? Sirianni needs to be relied upon to make these good choices in high pressure moments. So, this game, not an endorsement for Sirianni to continue doing that, right? Because it almost cost them. It probably could have costed this game. It could have costed them this game if they were playing against like the Commanders, who they're going to have in a couple weeks, or like the Rams or the Vikings, let alone the Lions, right? These decisions, while it didn't cost you today, also it's not going to cost you too greatly against bad teams where you're just more talented than. But could you imagine if this team didn't have the contributions of Saquon or Devontae Smith making incredible catches? This game could have really gone away from them. And Monday comes and you're looking at this Eagles team after another disappointing loss, and no one's going to blame anybody else but Sirianni. So it didn't hurt them on Sunday, but it is something to learn from. Not being too aggressive. Yes, going for it, 4th and inches, and 2-point conversions where you think you need it in a game, fine. Doing it once or twice, that's all right. But if you miss it once, you miss another 2-point conversion here, and then you're still insistent on doing it, someone's got to go over there and just tell Sirianni or tell whoever's making these choices, like, all right, maybe we should think twice about it, get points here, and continue with at least getting something back from these drives, right? Not leaving it empty-handed. That's just me, because the margin of error going forward for some of these games, the Cowboys against the Commanders and against other teams that the Eagles are going to have to play, they're not just going to get by with being more talented than the other team. It's going to come down to coaching, decision-making, and all that sort of stuff that you guys already know. So this is a learning moment from it. The Eagles are on a good roll here. Let's keep it going, and let's not try to ruin it by just some boneheaded decisions. So that's really what I took from this game. Good win for the Eagles, but definitely still some things to work out from. So from one NFC team, we go to another one in the Rams and this Seahawks game that was super entertaining as well. We're going to recap that game, talk about it because it went into overtime, and the Rams ended up getting a massive win as well. So stick to the show. We're going to be right back and talk about the Rams and the Seahawks game.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the Chip Shot Football Podcast here on Wednesday, November the 6th. Just recapping some of the games that we couldn't get to yesterday because of the elections. There was no show yesterday, so getting to it a day later, I had to bring up this game between the Rams and the Seahawks because really all NFC West games so far this year have been extremely entertaining, at least if not for the entire game or for most of it. There was that one Cardinals and Rams game that just got really out of hand, and the Cardinals surprised everybody by just beating the heck out of the Rams in week 2, I believe. So, but for the most part, all these games, like the Seahawks 49ers, this game, the Rams and the 49ers game, right? The Cardinals and the 49ers game, they've all been very entertaining for all these games. So we've seen some surprises. We've seen a lot of high-scoring games. The Seahawks and the 49ers game, if I didn't mention that one. All these games have been awesome, and this one fit the bill extremely well. And because it took overtime for the Rams to win this game, right? I believe the first overtime game in these divisional games that it was decided in overtime. So it was another wrinkle in all these games and how they've all played out. And the Rams, like most of you know, walked it off in overtime. Matthew Stafford threw a dime to Demarcus Robinson to win 26-20. The Rams get their third straight win to come back from starting the season 1-4. They're now sitting at 4-4 and second in the division up until this point. While the Seahawks, on the other end of the spectrum, lose their second straight game. They drop to 4-5 and slide to last place in the division. Unfortunately, this is their first time that they find themselves under 500 all season, so they're now going into their bye week, so it is a good time to kind of regroup everything, not really panic, but you have now a break where things might not be going your way. This break definitely does them a lot more good than bad, and trying to just regather everything and fix some of the problems to still be in this race, right? Maybe if they don't win the division, certainly a playoff spot is in contention. But in this game, we didn't really see the Seahawks at full strength because there was no DK Metcalf in this game for them after getting injured last week against the Falcons. But Jackson, Smith, and Jigba had a great game for them to keep Seattle in this game or give them something back with the lack of DK Metcalf not being out there for the Seahawks. So that was great to see Jackson, Smith, and Jigba contributing. But also, talking about wide receivers not really putting their mark on this game, Puka was in this game for a little bit, but then he got ejected in this game for throwing a punch at Seattle's Dodson. And at this point, the Rams, the first half was very weird, very low scoring, very ugly anyway. And then just out of nowhere, I'm watching the game and I see Puka getting ejected. And Puka, obviously I don't know him, but just from looking at him, from how he is as a player, some interviews that he does, doesn't look like a guy that's confrontational or in your face or really just angry or really emotional like that. So for him to get ejected, I was very confused at what was going on. But yeah, a very weird game overall. But, like we mentioned and briefly mentioned there, Jackson Smith and Jigba, his massive game. He had 7 receptions for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tyler Lockett contributed with 63 yards and a touchdown as well. Kenneth Walker, 83 yards and 25 carries. Another solid game from him. And Geno Smith throwing for almost 400 yards in another game. 3 touchdowns, but also 3 interceptions, which we're going to get to in just a little bit. Whereas the Rams, a much cleaner game for Stafford, 2 touchdowns and 1 interception, 298 yards. Kyron Williams, pretty quiet game for him, 69 yards, but still pretty effective. But Cooper Kupp had a great game, 11 receptions, 104 yards. Demarcus Robinson was the hero, right, with 6 receptions, 94 yards, and 2 touchdowns, stepping up for the absence of Puka Nacua. So, looking at how this game played out, ultimately, the first half, right, very, very misleading as to this game and what it really meant going into the second half, right? Because in the first half, dull, absolute dud of a game because there was 8 punts between both of these teams to start the game, and Seattle also threw an interception in there as well. So just very ugly football being played until eventually the Rams took the lead 3-0, but Seattle responded with a touchdown late in the first half to make it 3-7, but the Rams followed that with their own interception, and Seattle scored another touchdown after that. So the Seahawks are feeling good at home. They're going into halftime 13-3. Then still, this game was far from finished because the Rams came back into the game and scored a touchdown to start the second half. So it's still a very close game, 10-13 at this point. And I thought, when it's 10-13 and both teams, after coming off of a first half where everyone seems to be struggling, I thought that the Rams snatched all the momentum when they had that 103-yard pick six returned by Cameron Kitchens, the safety, I believe, for the Rams. He intercepted Geno Smith in the end zone, and he returned that whole thing. He ran the length of the field, and at that point, the Rams, after also tagging on a field goal to make it 13-13, now they led after that pick six touchdown 20-13, and from being down 13-3, they scored 17 unanswered points, and I thought at that point that the Rams finally clicked it, got it all into motion, and the Seahawks were just not going to be able to respond. And Seattle actually had a chance right after that to get back into the game because they blocked a punt, but Geno Smith threw another interception in the red zone, just a killer. And then at that point, I'm also thinking, if the game's already not over, this one definitely sealed it. But to Seattle's credit, they didn't roll over, they didn't give up, they stayed resilient, and they tied the game up finally at 20-20 with 51 seconds left in regulation. Nothing else happened for the remaining 51 seconds, and Seattle actually got the ball first in overtime. So you're thinking at that moment, like, wow, Seattle, despite throwing the interceptions and the game being overall sloppy, the Seahawks might have a chance to steal this game from the Rams. But the defense for the Rams stopped the Seahawks on a crucial fourth down. Critical of the Seahawks because they were in field goal range at that point. So it goes back to the Buccaneers' decision, right, to go for 2 points here. Maybe was it a little bit too aggressive to go for it on fourth down? Because if you kick a 3 there, the Rams end up scoring a touchdown anyway, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. But maybe kicking a field goal there, it affects how the Rams approach their their following drive, knowing that they only need a field goal, maybe they don't take that shot. Maybe they're not so aggressive with it. They settle for a field goal as well. I'm thinking in hindsight, obviously, we don't know what would have happened, but, it ends up costing them because not getting that fourth down, they don't do anything with the ball, and then, of course, the Rams go down, and Stafford throws that great pass to Demarcus Robinson. They win the game, and they go to 4-4. So, really, it was a great game. If anything that I learned for the Rams in this game is that they can score with any team. And Puka Nacua wasn't playing in this game pretty much for the majority of it. And still, they get guys to contribute. Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Johnson, Puka when he's there, Parkinson, their tight end, Kyron. They can get guys to contribute. When Puka and when Cooper Kupp aren't there, those other guys step up. Tutu Atwell is another one. And when those guys are in there, they get a majority of the looks, and opposing defenses can't really stop them, as a credit to Sean McVay, Matthew Stafford, for running this offense so prolifically well. That's really what I took away from this game for the Rams, at least, is that they're going to be a team to watch. They're 4-4, but I would be scared. I would be more scared of them than a lot of these teams in the NFC, just on their personnel, their coaching. They have everything, and their defense doesn't get enough credit, honestly, with guys like Byron Young, Braden Fisk, Jared Verse, Kobe Turner. These guys, they're monsters. They changed the game. All of them are either rookies or they're in their second year, and they're impacting the game at such a high rate. And I still feel like a lot of people aren't giving this defense a lot of credit, where just starting with those guys, they do a lot for this defense, and they impact the games each and every week. So the Rams are just as advertised, right? Just as good. But for the Seahawks, my problem stems with just them continuing to hurt themselves in these situations. Their running game, one, is solid, but the disciplinary stuff, right? The situational moments where you can't have a penalty, where you can't have turnovers like this, they don't really get out of their own way, right? 3 turnovers in this game to the Rams, 1 turnover in this game is obviously a big deal. And also, the 12 penalties that Seattle had to Los Angeles is 8 penalties. It's just sloppy football. And they are talented. They have, like Jackson Smith and Jigba proved his worth again. If people still had doubts about him. You don't have DK Metcalf in this game, but still, you're right there with the Rams. The margin of error is so small because you're missing a guy so impactful like DK Metcalf, and you throw these interceptions, obviously not intentional, but in certain situations, I just think that Geno, whatever the play call is, they got to be a little bit more conservative, not being so aggressive, and just the idea of being a gunslinger and things like that, that teeters on the brink of just being reckless with the ball. And Geno has all these great games with throwing over like 350, 300 yards and whatnot. But at some point, can we have like a 175-yard game, 200-yard game where everything is effective, clean, the running game is looking good, no penalties to hurt yourself, the defense is capable of playing very good, as we saw in this game? When are we going to see a game like that? That's really the next step that I think the Seahawks need to take, because these games are fun. They're always entertaining games, but it always feels like they're on the wrong end of them when they throw turnovers and the penalties and things like that. So I just don't know what I'm going to get from this Seahawks team, and hopefully they kind of tone it down a little bit and just become a bit more effective, not night and day, after just 1 week of being on a bye, but just toning it down just a little bit and being more cautious, more conservative, I think could be a good thing for this team, because they are talented. I just think at some times they're a little bit all over the place when you have calm, cool, collected teams on the other side, led by McVay, like a Shanahan, like a Dan Quinn, Dan Campbell, these guys that execute at the highest level. That's the difference I see right now with the Seahawks. So once they fix that, they have proven they can be competitive. So they just need to take that next step, and they'll be in a good spot going forward. But overall, it was a great game, and we're going to leave that game there and quickly go over to our last segment on today's show. We got to talk about Sunday Night Football here quickly because it was a good game overall for the Vikings to get back into the win column, but the Colts finding themselves in a weird spot here with Joe Flacco and Anthony Richardson after a disappointing performance on this past Sunday night. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back quickly and talk about Sunday Night Football. Thank you guys for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just briefly getting here and talking about the Sunday Night Football game that we had this past Sunday, obviously between the Vikings and the Colts, and what turned out to be a pretty entertaining game, a game of two halves, obviously, with the Vikings pulling it out. 21-13 was the final score. The Vikings stopped their two-game losing streak with this victory, and now the Vikings sit at 6-2 and second in the NFC North solely because the Packers lost this past week, obviously, to the Lions. And also, on the other side of things, the Colts dropped to under 500 with their record now at 4-5. And this was Joe Flacco's return to the starting job as a quarterback officially, because the other time that he started, Anthony Richardson was still technically a starter. He was just hurt. But with the benching of Anthony Richardson and everything, this was the first game that Joe was the starter. And it was pretty underwhelming, to say the least, for Joe. And the expectations I think everybody had for this game, for the Colts, right? Thinking that Joe, rightly so, it's not like I thought that it was egregious or just crazy to think that Joe was going to come in here and throw for like 250 and 2 touchdowns. I was right there with everyone thinking that Joe was going to come in, be effective like he was in all these other games, but it wasn't the case. The Vikings kind of spoiled that with a pretty good defensive performance from them. It was a performance that I thought they desperately needed because of their struggles recently over the last 2 games, and also the passing game being under question, a lot of it, and the Colts coming in with guys like Josh Downs, Michael Pittman, and A.D. Mitchell, who certainly are very young, but are very talented. And I thought they could have caused them a lot of problems just based on how much leeway they were giving up through the air to some of these teams. But they really shut the door on them. Joe Flacco looked pretty uncomfortable the entirety of the night. And the running game wasn't really there. But still, this game was close because Darnold arguably played his worst half of 2024 with a bad interception kind of to start off the game, and he gave up the first score, if I'm not mistaken, to Indianapolis when he fumbled, and they returned it for a touchdown. So not a great start for Darnold. He had 3 turnovers overall in this game, so far from the greatest of heights we've seen from Sam Darnold so far, but still, credit to that defense for really stepping up and showing everybody again that they are one of the best units in the NFL and they can play to that level. It was just a couple games there where they failed to live up to those standards. And like I said, the defense played very well because not only did they limit Joe Flacco to his lowest passing yards of the entire season with 179, no touchdowns and an interception. They also held Jonathan Taylor to only 49 rushing yards and 13 carries. So not really there for this running game, obviously. And I think also Joe Flacco didn't benefit because of that. And in the passing game, Josh Downs had a decent game, 6 receptions for 60 yards. But everybody else, other than Alec Pierce, only had 1 reception. Every other receiver had 1 reception except Alec Pierce. So it just goes to show the struggles that the Colts had in this game. Whereas on the other side, Sam Darnold had 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and that fumble lost, like I said. He threw for 290 yards. Aaron Jones contributed with 64 rushing yards, whereas Justin Jefferson continues to have the quietest, just exceptional season that he continues to have, because he doesn't score touchdowns, really. I think he hasn't scored for a couple games now, but in this game he had 7 receptions, 137 yards, receiving yards, and that, if you look at it, this stat line, it's 137 yards this past week, 115 yards against the Rams, 81 yards against the Lions, 92 against the Jets, and 85 against the Packers a couple weeks ago. So he's performing very well, doing very well just in terms of his numbers and whatnot, but he doesn't have too many touchdowns to kind of reward him for his efforts. And, it was the tight ends also that showed out. Josh Oliver had a touchdown, Jalen Naylor had a touchdown, and Jordan Addison had a spectacular catch for a touchdown as well. And just overall, how the game ended up turning out was, in the first half, like I said, ugly. Indianapolis fumbles on their first drive, and Minnesota throws an interception on their first drive right after that. So it kind of set the table for what the first half was going to be. Then Indianapolis got on the board, not because of their offense, but because of their defense. Like I said, returning that fumble off of Sam Darnold. They were up 7-0 in this game, and Minnesota missed 2 field goals as well. And Indianapolis also missed another field goal as well towards the end of the first half. So somehow, through all the craziness, this game was only 7-0. And I think that was the window for the Colts. Now looking at it right now as I'm talking, with all these just weird events for the Vikings, right? Uncharacteristic turnovers from Sam Darnold, the 2 missed field goals. This was the chance for the Colts to really get out to a bigger lead, because 7-0 wasn't really anything. It was only 1-score game, and in the second half, the Vikings turned the offense up a notch, and they scored 2 back-to-back touchdowns, and now the game is 14-7, and the Colts, instead of being in a position where they took advantage of those missed opportunities, the missed field goals and things like that, they find themselves down just in a blink of an eye. And after another interception by each of these teams in the second half, Indianapolis got a field goal to make it 14-10, and that's as close as this game ever got in the second half, really, or in the game just overall for the Colts, because Minnesota scored one more time after that to really close this game out, and the Colts tacked on that field goal. But the second half was really all about Minnesota. Sam Darnold had all of his touchdowns were in the second half, so the offense eventually got rolling for the Vikings, and I think this game was just a missed opportunity really for the Colts. This was Joe's lowest passing yards total in 2024. It's surprising, again, because not only had he been killing it recently against the Jaguars most notably, but Minnesota's pass defense was among the worst in the NFL. So they really did an exceptional job, Minnesota's defense, to stifle Joe Flacco, and not only stifle Joe Flacco, but really the idea of stifling Jonathan Taylor. And Indianapolis is obviously smart enough to know that switching from one quarterback to the other constantly is not good. So they're going to stick with Joe Flacco, but I think really they failed to capitalize on the mistakes by Minnesota in this game, and they took advantage of the one turnover that they had, the fumble recovery, but that interception preserved or evaded a touchdown the one on the first drive by Sam Darnold. But after that, the missed field goals that they just couldn't convert into points whatsoever, I think they're going to live to regret it a little bit. And also, especially with Minnesota's defense in a spot where people were doubting them a little bit, for them to kind of step up as well and make it tough for Joe Flacco also deserves some credit, like I said. And lastly here, miraculously, the Colts never got into the red zone once this entire game, while Minnesota was 3 for 5 in the red zone overall for themselves. So that's also in connection to the run game really not being there. And I think that more often than not hurts Joe Flacco, because Joe, does great passing the ball and whatnot, and he has had some. Sorry, I'm about to sneeze. He's had some big games. He's had some big games throwing the ball all over the yard, but it's not without saying that this running game needs to also be there to contribute and complement that side of the ball. Because when teams know that he's going to pass, they'll sit back a couple more guys will sit back there. They'll be expecting the pass, and that way it's tougher. And once the pass rush does get there, Joe's not the most evasive guy at this point in his career. So if they have the running game going, obviously it opens up the play action. And then from that point on, when you create more separation, Joe can hit these throws when there's no pressure and when all these things are working to the fullest of extent. But when the defense is stifling the run, where they know they're going to pass, it becomes a little bit tougher for Joe, especially when he's kind of a sitting duck back there. So they're not going to be this bad in the running game. I know Jonathan Taylor's better than this. The offensive line is better than this. I think it's just more an ode to the Vikings and their defense for having a very good comeback performance in this game. But the Colts, definitely not out of it yet. They're going to stick with Joe Flacco for the foreseeable future, I think. Probably until the end of the season, unless he gets hurt or really, really plays bad. I wouldn't go back and just switch to Anthony Richardson just willy-nilly. I don't think that does them any good. But they're still in this race a little bit. They need to just get over this game. This was just a bad game for them. Missed opportunities. I'm sure they're going to correct it. But for the Vikings, great win for them. The Colts, they're going to get better off of this. I'm sure they're going to come back with a better performance this upcoming week. But overall, that does it for all the recaps. We're officially done with Week 9, and we're going to start talking about Week 10 in tomorrow's show. But for right now, I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. And if you want to catch more of the Chip Shot Football Podcast, go to the YouTube channels for both of the networks, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to catch more of the live shows, but also a lot more content around the NFL in a variety of different ways. And if you do want to see more of the live shows, get involved with them, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with me, Manny Maradiaga, as your host, talking, covering, debating, discussing everything about the NFL. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about Week 10 and previewing a highly anticipated game on Thursday Night Football tomorrow between the Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee